Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. It's our inaugural edition. We're taping here on the afternoon of Friday, the 18th of January, 2013. We're in the waning days of the first Obama administration. Obama 1 coming to an end. Obama 2 is beginning in reality and by law at noon on Sunday, when Obama will be sworn in by Roberts of the Supreme Court in a private indoor ceremony. And hopefully this time Roberts will have read the oath, right, which is prescribed by the Constitution. His scholarship not too good last time. And then there'll be the public ceremony, everything repeated in public on Monday, but Obama will be in the second term as of noon on the 20th, but the ceremonies, therefore, on Monday, somewhat muted. Now, just let me get this out of the way at the beginning. The United Front Against Austerity will be present. We've got some leaflets. We've got some posters. We've got some placards, signs, maybe a banner. If we're lucky, it won't be huge, but it will be significant. And a lot of it depends on you. There are a number of things going on. There are interventions that have already happened. There's a Tavis Smiley event with a lot of essentially ruling class types addressing it. We've had an intervention there. I would suggest, just for people who may be coming in, suppose you decide on the spur of the moment, what the heck, let's go and see this inauguration. It won't be that crowded, according to most estimates. It won't be the 2 million of last time around, maybe 600 to 800,000. It's interesting. The estimate is done by go and see how many portable toilets there are and extrapolate from there, and you'll see how many the National Park Service is expecting on the mall, 600, 800,000 maybe, which is, of course, a healthy crowd. You'll get the whole experience of having been to an inauguration. Some of us will be at Farragut West at about 10:30 a.m. The speech, Obama leaves for the White House, leaves the White House for Capitol Hill at 11:30 a.m. So we'll be at Farragut West. There will be UFAA people at Farragut West, so you can come in at Farragut West, or you can come in at Farragut North. Farragut Square, let's say at the feet of Admiral Farragut, that good old guy who said, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead, from a Spanish family, Farragut. So 10:30 a.m. on the Monday of the inauguration. If you happen to be down there milling around and you want to hook up with programmatic intervention, then do stop by. Now, programmatic intervention, of course, means the Wall Street sales tax. It means the 14th Amendment to shut down the Republican sabotage, blackmail, extortion, and national wrecking operation in service of the oligarchs. And it means nationalize the Federal Reserve, get those terror tranches of 0% century bonds rolling to build that infrastructure and create the 30 million jobs. In order to get anywhere with this stuff, you've got to have discipline, right? And even as a candidate, it's got to be a disciplined, targeted message. It simply will not do to be dragged in one direction or the other by the fact that you hate Bush so much, or you hate Obama so much, or you hate the NRA, or you hate Senator Schumer, or Durbin, or whatever it is. Hatred, not a good guide. So stick to the programmatic intervention. And I would also say it's really not very productive to try to do it on somewhat antiquarian issues like 9/11. If that's all you've got, you're essentially out of the picture. Now, let me just start off by, we have big stories and a lot of material, but let's encourage people that some effect is being had, right? We do know Bernie Sanders has announced that he's coming online with a Wall Street sales tax, what he calls a transaction tax. Unfortunately, he was on the MSNBC. He was on there with Ed Schultz 2 weeks ago when he said that, yes, he was going to propose a transaction tax. Then, unfortunately, last Friday, the 11th, I guess it was, the 11th of January, old Bernie was on there with Ed Schultz, and even though they were talking about equality of income and income disparities and Wall Street and how greedy and predatory they were, there was not a word about the Wall Street sales tax. So who knows what happened, an oversight, off message, or threats, who knows what it is. But the point is we've got to gear up on that. But still, it is moving. And as we'll hear in just a minute, the 14th Amendment is moving. But let's say, what effect are we having, right? This program here, the Tarpley.net website, the Twitter feed that I have, the UFAA website, the UFAA agitation in general. Well, here's the Washington Post of last Tuesday, January 15th. Now, let me premise this. The goal of these operations is to introduce ideas into the minds of policymakers, even ruling class figures, of course, to try to make them think that this somehow becomes their own idea, so that they embrace it at a conscious or even subconscious level. It doesn't matter. They've just got to embrace it. And one of the symptoms of this is when verbal formulations in ID format begin to show up. In other words, there are certain concepts which are typical, say, of the agitation that we're unfolding here, and the propaganda work and the political education. Certain formulations are typical. Certain concepts, first of all, are typical. And then sometimes you'll find the concept expressed in the formulation, and that's ID format. In other words, you're saying something, and you're saying it in such a way, with such words and such a choice of rhetoric and so forth, that it's somehow likely that you can tell where you got it, where it came from. All right, Michael Gerson, reactionary, right? And he's whining about Obama and how Obama is not being nice to the Republicans. He's not reaching across the aisle. He's not appeasing fascism enough. That's Gerson's essential argument, right? You appease fascism sometimes, but you should appease fascism more. So this is an attack against Obama from somebody who is much worse than Obama, in this case, the neocons at the Washington Post. Now, here we have Gerson's argument. Given the weak Republican position, Obama must be tempted by a shiny political object, the destruction of the congressional GOP. I repeat, the destruction of the congressional GOP. Now, if you listen to this program, I basically laid this out as the goal for the year. This year is the destruction of the Republican Party as a national party, therefore in Congress where that is expressed, and to let them dwindle to the status of a racist, reactionary, regional party centered in the Deep South, the Intermountain West, and various rural areas. And this is, I believe, what Michael Gerson is reflecting, that Obama is tempted to pursue the destruction of the congressional GOP. And he goes on, he knows that the Republicans are forced by the momentum of their ideology to take positions on spending that he can easily demagogue. He is in a good position to humiliate them again, to expose their internal divisions and unpopular policy views. It may even be a chance to discredit and then overturn the Republican majority in the House, reversing the 2010 election. Hallelujah. That's what he should be doing. That's what I've been demanding. And I think we've somehow gotten into the Washington Post editorial room. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C., directing your kind attention to Tarpley.net, Tarpley.net. New items on there all the time, especially regarding Syria, now Algeria, right? The Algeria hostage crisis. We'll talk about that at some length later in the program. And, of course, you can buy Just Too Weird, Bishop Romney, and the Mormon takeover of America with polygamy, theocracy, and subversion. There is interest in some of the cable channels have now been expressing interest in some of this material, and I'll report about that when the broadcast dates become known. Anyway, Gerson accuses Obama of wanting the destruction of the congressional GOP. Horrors. It's like a delicate exotic fruit, this fascism, right? These are fair weather fascists, right? If Obama's not nice to them, he's going to tear them apart. This is the genius of the founders, that extremism, lunacy of the kind that is going on in the Tea Party caucus and the Republican study group puts you in a dangerous position, even if you think it's playing to the folks back home. The momentum of their ideology drives them to take positions on spending that he can easily demagogue. Do you mean genocidal budget cuts, killer cuts, genocidal austerity against the American people? We're supposed to put up with that because of the momentum of Republican ideology, which is based on Austrianism, Murray Rothbard, Ayn Rand, von Mises, von Hayek, and a collection of reactionary mummies? Is that what we're supposed to put up with? And, of course, bring up immigration. Do it fast. Bring up a way to regularize and normalize the position of everybody in this country within a year. Forget about the fines. Forget about the harassment. Forget about the long calvary of suffering and grief, and extend that to everybody. That's a workforce you need. You don't want to harass them. You don't want to drive them out to self-deportation. You want to get them educated, get them driver's licenses, get them trained, get them into community colleges and other institutions. If it weren't for this, the U.S. would share the demographic crisis of Western Europe and Japan. So stop with the xenophobia. Stop with the anti-foreigner, anti-worker sentiments, and anybody in the union movement, you better make those people into your allies, because if they're not your allies, they're going to be your enemies. There'll be scabs and strikebreakers used against you. You better be on their side, so they'll be on yours. So anyway, Gerson seems to have gotten this concept. The House Republican majority can indeed be destroyed. What a horrible thing to want. Now, I wish Obama were working for this. I don't think he is. But Gerson seems to be very much afraid of it. And then we have another denizen of the Washington Post editorial room, Jonathan Capehart, speaking on the 15th of January at, 6:30 in the evening on the Reverend Al Sharpton show on MSNBC. He says, if the Republicans don't change, they will be more and more what they are now, a regional reactionary party. Regional reactionary party. Yes, that's the magic word, reactionary. They are not conservative. To call the Republicans conservatives is to sugarcoat fascism. It is to give them a mild and relatively unthreatening exterior. They are not conservative. They don't want to conserve anything. They are right-wing radicals. They are aiming at the massive overthrow of every American tradition. The United States is traditionally a high-wage country. These Confederates from the Tea Party come along and say, no, we want it to be a low-wage, deregulated hellhole. Well, with that, dear friends, you cannot compete with anybody, not with China, not with Mexico, not with Brazil, not with Europe. You can just forget it. You will be essentially destroying yourself. So this is a matter of some urgency. Anyway, the Washington Post and its writers this week began Tarpley Speak in ID format. Michael Gerson and Jonathan Capehart. Take a look at my Twitter feed, and you will find these things up there. So take heart. There is a potential to move things. It can be done. It should be done. It must be done. And it will be done. But keep focused. Be disciplined. Don't go off into various side issues. And above all, don't be carried away by hatred of individuals. Remember, the cardinal sin of these Arab Spring operations, to the extent that there were people in Tunisia and Egypt especially who really thought they were looking for democratic reform, and especially if they had any idea of economics. It is a terrible mistake to make everything depend on one person. Right? Down with Bush. Down with Bush and you get Obama. Down with Obama. Then what are you going to get? Something worse, I guarantee. Look at the people over there. Down with Ben Ali. Well, is it worse now? Maybe that's debatable. But it's not a whole lot better. And down with Mubarak, I think by now it is worse, right? Certainly the powers of the army to throw you in jail for the year or two after Mubarak are bigger than they were under Mubarak. In other words, the power of Morsi over the courts is something that Mubarak doesn't seem to have had. So do it programmatically. Learn that lesson. If you want to have reform, remember, there's got to be a material basis for democracy. If you have mass poverty and mass unemployment, democracy is not likely to thrive. There's got to be a material basis in economic prosperity. This is what allows democracy to occur. The Latin farmers of the Massachusetts countryside were prosperous. This made it possible for them then to contemplate political reform. As Confucius says in the Analects, when you're confronted with a population, there are two imperatives. First, make them prosperous, and secondly, educate them. And then self-government becomes possible. Now, in the context right now, we're fighting, and these are the three themes which I proposed, at least, for the United Front Against Austerity intervention here at the inauguration weekend. Three things: the Wall Street sales tax, the 14th Amendment to shut down the Republican blackmail machine, and indeed, the 14th Amendment is here to stop a coup d'etat, because if Obama allows default, that would then usher in a period of chaos in which some Petraeus or some neo-Petraeus would be able to think about a coup, military coup or a cold coup, right, around some figure, who knows, like Biden or some other. Right? If you impeach both of them, you could impeach Obama and Biden, and then who would you get? You'd get it used to be Inouye, and now I guess it's anyway. You get. I'm sorry. It would be Boehner. Boehner would become president in that case, and then you'd see. So that's the idea. Now, right now, the focus is on the threat of the Republicans to create worldwide chaos and panic by default. We'll address that in the next segment. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So now that the Washington Post and its editorial room have learned some Tarpley speak, the destruction of the congressional GOP and the dwindling of the Republicans to a regional reactionary party. This is significant. Again, the moment where the mass media in general begin to describe the Republicans as the reactionary party, their doom will be sealed. And this is a way to introduce concepts by means of these words, right? Because unfortunately we live in a degraded intellectual environment, right? Let's see what Frank Luntz does about the status of the Republicans now as a reactionary party, and indeed a regional reactionary racist party focused in the Deep South around figures like Ted Cruz, Rand Paul, Marco Rubio. DeMint, of course, has gone. It looks like he went too far with his proposals there and somehow got caught up in the cleanup, right? It looks like he went down the road of a coup and got caught up in the counter-coup. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. But now, let's look at the 14th Amendment front. This is the most immediate, perhaps, although we want to keep the stress on the Wall Street sales tax in particular. Here we go, Washington Post, Saturday, January 12th. Democrats urge Obama to bypass the GOP on debt. Now, it's an interesting letter. It comes from Senator Harry Reid, the majority leader of the Democrats in the Senate, Durbin of Illinois, Schumer of New York, Patty Murray of Washington. That's the Democratic Party leadership in the Senate. They are the majority. So they write that the Republican position of blocking a debt limit increase unless the Democrats agree to cuts in Medicare and Social Security is outrageous and absurd. And they say, in the event that Republicans make good on their threat by failing to act or by moving unilaterally to pass a debt limit extension only as part of unbalanced or unreasonable legislation, Obama must do it on his own by executive order. Yes. Now, unfortunately, they don't quite spell out the 14th Amendment, but the helpful Washington Post goes on, and for one of the rare occasions, they tell you actually what the 14th Amendment says, at least the key words. One option some congressional Democrats have long advocated would involve Obama invoking the 14th Amendment to the Constitution to declare congressional action unnecessary for raising the limit. The amendment holds that the validity of the country's public debt, quote, shall not be questioned. Some constitutional experts believe that statement means that Congress cannot tie the government's hands to borrow funds to meet obligations the government has already incurred. And that's exactly right. And good that we get shall not be questioned. We would better have a bigger quote. Of course, it's not up to Obama to invoke the 14th Amendment. Obama must obey the 14th Amendment. He cannot approach the Constitution like a delicatessen. It binds him. It forces him. It compels him. It obliges him. It coerces him. And indeed, the impeachment, if he doesn't respond to encouragement like this, it's not so much that we want him impeached because he has violated the formality of the 14th Amendment, although that would be fine. But the main thing is he'll be impeached then by the Republicans. In other words, in that atmosphere of chaos, breakdown, downgrades, depression, panic, the end of the world practically. That's the way most bankers in the world would see this. That's when he will become ripe for impeachment in the same way that Nixon did in his second term, Clinton in his second term after economic reverses. When the British went off the gold standard in September 1931, bankers said, that's the end of the world. This would now be the end of the world, of the post-1931 world. United States defaults on debt. That's the end of the world. Don't let some damn reactionary Yahoo tell you that it would be manageable. It's not manageable. And, of course, the Republican Party eagerly comes on the scene saying, we'll have legislation to make sure all the money goes to the bondholders. Right. Republican Party defends interests of Chinese and foreign bondholders against Social Security beneficiaries. Well, that's a way to destroy the Republican Party. There are several, but unfortunately that is predicated on the destruction of the United States going on at the same time. Now, here's Obama's situation. We've just heard that Reid, Schumer, Durbin, and Murray are telling him act unilaterally. Now, on the House side, it's actually better. Pelosi has demanded the 14th Amendment. Pelosi told reporters if she were president, she would invoke the 14th Amendment to raise the debt ceiling, quote, in a second. I've made my view very clear on that subject. Unfortunately, she's not president. Well, we've also got Steny Hoyer, somewhat less emphatically, and now Clyburn of South Carolina, the number 3 of the Democrats in the House, come out this week. I want the 14th Amendment. The entire Democratic congressional leadership is arrayed. What does Obama do? His press conference this past Monday, it seemed to me, was to try to dampen that momentum. He got up there and said, I refuse to negotiate. The Republicans have a gun to the head of the American people. He said that the Republicans were not going to collect a ransom check for not destroying the U.S. economy, that they had to pay their bills, that the debt ceiling does not increase spending, and of course that's true, it does not. It is simply a matter of paying for what you've already incurred. You've got to pay the invoice for what you've already spent. That's all fine. But what was missing is the direct reference to the 14th Amendment. He's got to do this. Because if he doesn't, here's two sides to not doing it. You've got to use the time now to educate the American people. They got to hear the president say, the 14th Amendment will be obeyed. I will pay the debt, come what may. This immediately obviates all the damage. It quiets down S&P and Fitch and Moody's and the international markets, all the enemies out there, all the international jackals, financiers, bloodsuckers in London, Frankfurt, the Far East, Latin America, all of those guys who hate the U.S. for, in this case, largely wrong reasons, got to keep them at bay. The way to do that is to say, look, we're going to be negotiating about budget problems, but we are not going to default. And I'm telling you that right now today. So, dear Republicans, put that in your pipe and smoke it. You will not extort, blackmail, sabotage, wreck, destroy. This is treason, as Bob Brinker of Moneyline pointed out. Anybody who deliberately brings about the national bankruptcy of the United States by default has committed an overt act in the service of an international banking cabal. Maybe the International Derivatives and Swaps Association might be mentioned in this context, or something like that. Some, who call it what you want, the Interalpha Banking Group, or anything you like, some banking faction. So that's got to be done. If you don't do that, it's hard to pull it out at the last minute. Now, my view is that Obama doesn't embrace the 14th Amendment. He doesn't even embrace the platinum coin, which is much weaker, because he wants to go to the brink. He wants to do the cuts in Social Security. He wants to change CPI. He wants further cuts, killer cuts, in Medicare expenditures after he's already gouged $700 billion and the $400 billion that he's offered still floating around. Obama wants this. So the pressure has got to be on Obama. Invoke, obey the 14th Amendment. Obey the 14th Amendment and say so now. Tell us right now, in the inaugural address on Monday, we want to hear about the 14th Amendment and how the Republicans can go home. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Now, the other side of what Michael Gerson was talking about in the Washington Post, the destruction in place of the Congressional Republican Party, the destruction of their majority, and the permanent smashing of this political entity. Remember, this has happened in California, right? The Republicans have been relegated to the status of a permanent or semi-permanent minority party. The only way they become governor is with some occasional crisis and then a demagogue coming in like Schwarzenegger with the support of George Shultz and Warren Buffett, I guess it was. No, this won't work. And here in Maryland, the Republican Party, a permanent minority party. Now, there's a good reason to think that the few remaining Republicans in the northeastern states are now headed for the last roundup where they belong. The death knell for the Republican Party in the northeast quadrant of the United States, not its strong point, but another big step. If you're not in California, if you're not in the key mid-Atlantic in Maryland, if you're not in the Northeast, you're on your way to being a regional party. And that may be what we've got. The Sandy story, Sandy relief. Now, the Republicans grudgingly passed a $10 billion, $9 billion down payment on this. This past week, the Republicans finally passed $51 billion of Sandy relief. The vote was 241 to 180. That was 192 Democrats and just 49 Republicans. This means that 179 reactionary Republicans voted no. Now, that's the hardcore Tea Party of about 50 to 60, 20 or 30 more Tea Party fellow travelers, and then a kind of reactionary swamp in the middle, fearing primary challenges from the Koch brothers and so forth. So with 179 Republicans voting against New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, Pennsylvania, and other states, the task for Republican candidates is hard. I hope this will be the death knell for the reactionary party in this part of the United States, because they have just gone too far. We're told that the Republicans, a lot of them vote no while hoping for yes. That's not good enough. Also notice Governor Christie of New Jersey fighting for his political life, I would say, knowing that he's got to separate himself from that or he will go down. So far he has succeeded, but by attacking Boehner. And this past week he said, if you think you're going to pull this on us, you picked the wrong state to mess with. Yeah, right. Don't mess with New Jersey and New York, you bums. You Tea Party bums, right? We've heard don't mess with Texas. That's obsolete. Georgia and Texas are the homes of the Tea Party, and they are going down. They tied their wagon to the Tea Party. No, that's a loser. Don't mess with New Jersey. Don't mess with New York. That makes some sense. And that, I think, is a very healthy moment, because the cultural, political hegemony of the most backward part of the United States, centering on Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, and the rest of these places, where we have the highest levels of child mortality, infant mortality, the highest levels of illiteracy. Texas, of course, leads in the highest percentage of people who have no health care to rely on, right? They're saying, come on down. No thanks, guys. No thanks. That Confederate hellhole can stew in its own juice. And naturally, we want to do something about it. But for now, if it takes this political form, then clearly not. But isn't it interesting? You turn in this little reactionary id that comes on the radio, Mark Levin, and he says, he hates Governor Christie. So, yeah, great. Let him attack Christie. You know the formula, evil versus evil benefits good. And, of course, the Republicans are also attacking Senator Hagel, their own guy. Isn't this interesting? Look at all those internecine conflicts between the moderates, the corporate country club set, and the loony birds out there at Tea Party Junction. So the Republican Party, again, bring up an immigration bill that's humane, welcoming, that looks to the future of the United States, the key role that Hispanic and Asian and other immigrants have to play, already play. You will do something good for the country, and you'll also smash the Republicans into pieces, because there's the corporate wing would like to say, let everybody in because we want them to drive down wages. And the other part says, no, none of them can come in, build a wall. Well, we're for relatively liberal policies of legal immigration combined with a real minimum wage law so that they cannot be used to drive down wages. All right, so that's that entire domestic situation. We'll get to the inauguration in a minute. Now, concerning Syria and then concerning Algeria, Libya, Mali, let's look at this. First of all, let's talk about this situation with Syria. This past weekend and during the week, there has been a shakeup here in the U.S. on the policy regards to Syria. It came, you could see it quite quickly in the Washington Post on Sunday with an article here about Assad, how Assad was gaining in power. Washington Post, Sunday, January 13th. Assad asserts power in Syria. No clear end to civil strife. Now, Liz Sly. What the point here is that when Assad gave his self-assured and defiant speech, which attracted, I think, the admiration of the world, anybody rooting for the underdog, root for Assad in this case. The State Department said he's out of touch with reality. But, writes this article, many Syrians wonder if it isn't the United States and its allies who are out of touch for continuing to press for a negotiated settlement. So here's the idea. Assad is gaining in confidence because the areas where the death squads have taken over, the places that are now under death squad administration and have been under death squad administration, are learning to hate the death squads, the warlords, the terrorists, the fanatics, the killers, the perpetrators of atrocities, the war criminals. They've been under that yoke. So now they got to know Assad. Now they can see what the alternative is. And, boy, they don't like it. And we have some interesting quotes here from old Liz Sly, who's been pushing this stuff. Conditions are deteriorating dramatically in rebel-held areas. Airstrikes and shelling by government forces, along with acute shortages of food, fuel, and medicine, are eroding much of the support the rebels initially enjoyed from local residents, according to a guy in Hama. Quote, Assad is confident because he knows we, terrorists, are losing ground in terms of popularity among the people. The Free Syrian Army has proved that they are unable to protect civilians and liberate the country without causing death and destruction. So that's one version of this. And then in another part of the same paper, we find, where did this come from? David Ignatius on the editorial page, the same Sunday, January 13th. David Ignatius, Anarchy in Syria. So it turns out the source for all this is an intelligence report provided to the State Department last week by Syrian sources working for the Free Syrian Army. They're talking about the situation in the northern area from Aleppo north to the Turkish border. Assad's army has largely disappeared, but the report draws a picture of disorganized fighters, greedy arms peddlers, and profiteering warlords. Now, these are euphemisms. We're talking about terrorists, lunatics, Salafists, people, I'm sure they got amputations and executions going on, maybe a few stonings, maybe a few beheadings. That's the kind of people you're dealing with there. And, of course, the material privations are acute, and they're militarily not competent. So it means that the rebels in northern Syria are losing the support of the population. Back in a minute. Welcome to the second hour of World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. Our inaugural program. It's the 18th of January here, and we're recording. So if you happen to be downtown on Monday for the inauguration, look around Farragut West, maybe at the feet of the Admiral, and one or two of us, I think, should be there, and then we'll go on to other things, right? And we'll have some leaflets. If you get a chance, you can print out the Wall Street sales tax leaflet that you can find at the United Front Against Austerity website, and make a sign, right? You can see, look on the Tarpley.net website there. You'll see a picture of me at the Capitol on the 31st of January with a small demonstration, and just put the sign, no cuts. We want Wall Street sales tax, and we want the 14th Amendment. Some combination of that. No cuts, Wall Street sales tax, 14th Amendment. That's the voice of the people right now. And if you have space, you can put seize the Fed. That's another good one. That's the basic platform. And I wouldn't clutter it up with other things, because those are the things that you want to see. That's what you want to get on TV, right? You don't want some other the slogan that's going to clutter it up. Right? It's got to be disciplined. It's got to be focused, targeted, and disciplined. Now, Syria. As we said, David Ignatius and Liz Sly here at the Washington Post, they've seen this State Department report from the Free Syrian Army that the Free Syrian Army has succeeded in alienating the population under their administration. Machiavelli wrote a report. He was working for the diplomatic service of the Florentine Republic, and he happened to visit the Venetian territories that had been occupied by France in 1509 after the Battle of Agnadello in May of that year. And the French were occupying them, and Machiavelli wrote back to the Florentine government, this occupation is going badly because the peasants are learning to hate the French, and they're even yearning for the Venetians to come back. Now, if that's possible, then certainly the Assad government, I think, can be they can see a good chance that they will reassert their authority in these areas. We're told that the military councils that the West had tried to set up, NATO, have failed because the United States and its allies didn't use them effectively to funnel aid to the rebels. There were hundreds of small groups, 10 to 20 fighters, spread all over the area of Aleppo. That is a death squad we're talking about. There are hundreds of small groups, which we would call death squads, 10 to 20 fighters each, spread all over the area of Aleppo. The FSA has been transformed, or we would say always was, disorganized rebel groups constituted by large numbers of criminals. All of our areas with efforts with the military council were abolished. Warlords are a reality on the ground now. A failed state is the most likely outcome of the current condition. If these people win, we must add. So not a good thing. And of course, Ignatius, with the most breathless banality, says, we haven't talked enough in the past that if you overthrow a repressive police state through foreign invasion or civil war, the basic framework of law and order can disappear too. That seems to be the story of Iraq, Libya, and now Syria. Oh, now you figured it out, huh, David? Well, the CIA won't win any prizes for prudence and planning ahead. Now, New York Times, not so quick on the uptake, but rebels find hearts and minds elusive. Syrian opposition fails to shape a political strategy to win skeptics. Here, it's Wednesday, January 16th. The opposition is helping to hold the Assad regime together, says Peter Harling of the International Crisis Group. Remember Brzezinski, Soros. The opposition has no strategy to preserve what's left of the state. Well, we have a strategy, and it is the defeat of the rebels and their exit, the exit of all foreign fighters from national territory, and then things will pretty much take care of themselves. So here in Washington, with this kind of coverage that I'm telling you about now, there is a change in the view of Syria, right? That it's not going to be possible. They have these cycles. They go from pessimism to optimism and then back to pessimism. They're now headed back into pessimism. And this is the moment when a death squad decides to strike in Algeria. And let's make this clear, right? We just heard the article here in the Washington Post, David Ignatius talking about the proliferation of hundreds of groups of 10 to 20 fighters each. We know that the al-Nusra is composed of about 30 groups, and maybe more by now, maybe twice as many by now. But what is it that's attacking in Algeria? We got the Algeria hostage crisis going on at this drilling site, right, in Amenas, in Algeria, on the border with Libya. So we're in the far east of Algeria in the Sahara Desert. Who is attacking? Who is taking hostages? It is a death squad. It is one of the NATO death squads, obviously, that was deployed by NATO against Libya in 2011. They've been running wild. It was obviously a death squad under the control of Kumu that killed Ambassador Stevens and the 3 other Americans on September 11th. And now we've got another typical NATO death squad attacking in Algeria. And we even know, because they've all been killed, at least one of them, one squad has been wiped out. The Algerian government says this death squad was composed of 2 Algerians, 3 Egyptians, 2 Tunisians, 2 Libyans, 1 from Mali, and 1 from France. And the entire death squad came in over the Libyan border. All right. Now, this has put the entire thing on the front burner. Now, let me premise it by the main strategic point. The NATO command, I think, and I have to assume they're running this, they have made a significant strategic blunder. Remember the blunder made by Hitler in 1941 to attack the Soviet Union before you finish off the British is a suicidal blunder. That's what NATO has done. They have opened up Mali, Algeria, before they finished in Syria. The resistance of Assad has brought him another dimension of survivability, not just important as it is that the Free Syrian Army death squads are alienating and antagonizing the population with their misrule, their atrocities, their warlords, their criminality, their looting, all the rest of it. But also now that if you're, for example, a terrorist operative, you're a terrorist fighter, an Al-Qaeda sympathizer or member in Tunisia or Libya, you now have a choice. Should you go to Turkey and go into Syria where things seem to be bogged down, or should you join the exciting new front in Algeria and Mali? And, of course, if you go to Mali, then you get to fight the West directly, right? You're going to find French troops on the ground. You're going to find U.S. forces doing the logistics. So this has a fascination all its own, and I'm sure fatwas are being issued saying that it's more virtuous to fight the French in Mali than to go and fight the Assad government in Syria. So I think this now opens up a possibility for relief. In other words, it's a diversion of the available NATO forces. Right? There's not an infinite pool of crazies who are willing to do this kind of activity. There's now a competing front. NATO has chosen to divide its forces, and they've done it, I think, at the wrong moment. So we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. Keep up with everything at tarpley.net, tarpley.net. This thesis will be elaborated there. And Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed. The Twitter feed, very important these days. So it was a NATO death squad attacking in Algeria. 2 Algerians, 3 Egyptians, 2 Tunisians, 2 Libyans, Mali, and France. This is typical. This is how it's been done. This is the story of Libya. This is the story of Syria. And now they want to bring that to Algeria. Notice, Algeria had not fallen to the Arab Spring. Algeria had been burned severely in the 1990s by the GIA, Groupe Islamique Armée. That was a Western-backed, obviously, terrorist insurrection featuring this guy, Mokhtar Belmokhtar, the guy, the uncatchable Marlboro man, whatever his story is, right? Already the mass media trying to glorify this character, right? Is he the new Bin Laden in the Maghreb or whatever he is? He's a criminal element, right? He's a professional kidnapper, smuggler, what have you. So let's not glorify him. But Algeria had resisted so far, right? They had not been able to bring resistance, begin destabilization of Algeria. Now, what the Algerians learned, among other things, is that when an insurrection starts, there's got to be the most brutal crackdown at the beginning to annihilate, to crush the initial terrorist manifestations. We can go back to the 1930s. There's a quote somewhere by Goebbels where he says, if the Prussian police and the Social Democratic Party and the unions had known how weak we were at the beginning, they could have crushed our brown shirt stormtrooper street gangs at the very beginning, and we would never have been able to get a toehold. The mistake was to tolerate the beginnings of the destabilization. And I have to say, concerning Syria, we were told in Banyas that in Banyas, where one of the early massacres occurred, one of the soldiers said that the order had been, don't fire on civilians, don't avoid shooting under any circumstances because of the fear of negative international publicity. And you see that the Syrian government has advanced from using soldiers to using tanks to using helicopters to using airplanes to using Scud missiles, we're told. The Algerian government, it seems to me, is well advised if they crush this at the beginning and therefore save untold lives in the process. Anyway, no state can be an aggressor on its own territory. Now, the way in which, of course, it's done is that the United States, Britain, France, and NATO have turned Libya into a terrorist base for al-Qaeda. This is what we talked about during 2011 into 2012. This was my message from Tripoli. Don't let this place become a terrorist base on the shores of the Mediterranean, 100 miles from Italian territory and not much further from Greek, French, Spanish, and other European territory. Now, in particular, I also mentioned when I was in Libya, the Libyans pointed to the question of the Tuaregs. These are the Berbers in general, the Kabyle people, the Tuaregs, and in particular the subgroup called the Kabyle Berbers, or the Berbers of Kabyle. This group these are the nomads, used to be on camels and so forth, now largely on Toyota pickup trucks, that cross the trackless wastes of the Sahara Desert in many cases, right? And there's not much there. They have now been recruited, and I reported to you that I was shown statements from Morocco that the king of Morocco had tried to get himself going as the patron, the father, the ethnarch of the Berbers and the Kabyle, and that they were trying to use them with the help of U.S., Israeli, French, British intelligence for destabilization, right? Because they want to destroy the nation states, and then they'll just create enclaves around the natural resources, the oil and gas wells and other things that they want, the uranium mines and so forth. Now, that is what happened in northern Mali. So we had people, you were told that the people involved in northern Mali, the people who have brought very brutal Sharia law and brutal, incompetent rule to northern Mali, that these people were in Libya supporting Gaddafi. I think that's quite a fantastic story. They would not have been supporting Gaddafi. I would say these are death squads coming out of Libya, people who were against Gaddafi. There is, of course, the idea that Gaddafi's arms depots have been widely looted, and that makes this happen. But if you look at that map, the stability of Libya and the outreach that Gaddafi had to this entire area. Remember, he had food operations in Mali and Niger. He was trying to create an economy that would let people be something other than what this guy Mokhtar Belmokhtar represents. All of that wiped out. We told you about it before it happened. So now it's happening. But, of course, now it's happening in a way that the NATO people are trying to steer. The idea is that you can tell by the responses. When the Algerian army went in, it was clear that the U.S., the British, the French, the Japanese, they were all whining and complaining that they had not been notified, that they had not been consulted. Well, remember, in this hostage crisis, the number of Algerian citizens is far greater. It's either 100 or, according to some accounts, it's 600. Now, the statements we have from Panetta tries to say, oh, no, it's only 100 people. The Algerian government says it's up to 600. And they are well advised not to tell the U.S., Britain, France, or Japan in advance. You tell it to the U.S., Britain, or France, you've essentially told the controllers of the death squads that you're dealing with that you're coming. You don't want to do that. And in the case of Japan, that's simply a way of telling the United States, I'm afraid Japan really can't exercise an independent role in this part of the world. So this is what you have. We are told that one interesting commentary on the Internet, it's apparently a source report, unsourced, it doesn't tell you who, but in the middle of the whining, right, that London is so upset. We heard this on National Public Radio this morning. Oh, the British government is so upset. Mr. Cameron had to change the date of his speech about the European Union. There was no consultation. This was an international site. This was BP. Well, I'd like to ask BP, our favorite, ne'er-do-wells, what kind of security did BP have around this place, and what happened to them? Where were the armed guards? Where were the alarms? Where was the defense mechanism for an important place like this? No, I'm afraid BP hasn't got a leg to stand on. But we're told in this unsourced source report, the Algerians, by going in there, have killed some big fish. And again, that's the only thing you can do. An Algerian minister also tells us some interesting things. If you think that the Algerian government would negotiate with terrorists, you are dreaming, you are delusional. That indicates that there was pressure from the West to negotiate. Don't go down that road with these death squads. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Therefore, concerning this Algerian hostage crisis, I think rather clear that the goal of the NATO governments was to use, and remains to use, this incident to try to smash the Algerian state. And the dangerous path on that would have been a process of negotiation with the terrorists, or allowing the terrorists, as they tried to do, to take the hostages back to Libya. This would have been absolute folly. So the Algerian minister, to repeat, says, if you think the Algerian government was going to negotiate with these terrorists, you are dreaming, you are delusional. Now, I take from that there was pressure applied by these Western governments. What London is whining about, what the White House and Hollande are whining about, and indeed the Japanese, they're whining not so much about the fact they weren't consulted, was that they wanted negotiations. We're reminded of the last days of the Tamil Tigers when Miliband and Kushner suddenly decided that it was such an important humanitarian case that there had to be a ceasefire, because otherwise those Tamil Tigers were going to get wiped out. In other words, the bad faith, the hypocrisy of the NATO people is that they want to keep these terrorists in the field because that's their infantry. Those are their forces, in effect. And I hope, it looks like the people in Algeria know it. Again, the Algerian minister essentially is saying, we went through the GIA, the Groupe Islamique Armée. We went through a very bloody conflict against similar death squads in the 1990s, and we will not repeat it. Therefore, a vigorous response at the beginning. So, now notice the way it's working. The U.S. and NATO install a terrorist regime in Libya on the shores of the Mediterranean. That then extends itself into Mali once Gaddafi has been eliminated. And then you've got a so-called civil war or conflict in Mali. Again, this is an area with no borders. These are borderless states as a practical matter. Then the French want to put a force into Mali, and the U.S. asks Mali for permission to do that. They then ask Algeria, the French ask Algeria, can you give us overflight permission into Mali? And the Algerian government essentially says yes. The U.S. government wanted permission to fly over Algeria. The Algerians say case by case only for you. So you see how all of this works. It is a crisis that is being cynically maneuvered by the Western governments to create the maximum of destruction. Now, the Algerians have essentially taken the elementary measure of self-defense. On NPR this morning, the sheen is coming off the Libyan intervention. Oh, they say on NPR, the Libyan intervention was low-hanging fruit, how easy that was. But now look at Libya today. Was that such a good idea? Well, why don't you think about that before you smash a country and destroy the lives of millions of people, right? These are these foreign policy dilettantes who can't see beyond the next television appearance. So again, just as Hitler committed the fundamental strategic blunder by attacking the Soviet Union, June 1941, before finishing off the British, now we've got NATO fighting a two-front war. There's now an Algerian-Mali front, and there's the Syrian front. Do they have enough crazies to keep both fronts well stocked with cannon fodder? A couple of other interesting notes. Some death squad in Algeria, which is holding hostages. Now, I don't think these are hostages that come from this drilling site, right? This in Amenas. I don't think it's that issue, but this is now an Algerian death squad with other Western, maybe even U.S. hostages. They want freedom for the blind sheik who is implicated in the 1993 bombing of the World Trade Center. You can read all about that, by the way, in 9/11 Synthetic Terror, Made in USA, and you'll see how that one was manufactured, and this blind sheik was drawn into it. Now, it looks like he probably did have criminal intent, but nevertheless, this was a sting, and it was a stunt that they wanted. Right, the FBI wanted that bomb to go off at the beginning of Clinton's term in order to increase control on Clinton. So there we have that. Now, concerning Syria and concerning this whole situation, since the NATO forces are likely to be experiencing bigger problems, be weaker, maybe undergo more defeats in Syria, what could they do? Well, there's always the accusation of poison gas and chemical weapons. Now, that allegation, the accusation against Assad that he'd used chemical weapons, was made in December, and it fell flat. It went nowhere. It platzed. Nothing came out of it. And now there's an attempt to recycle the same accusation. We're talking about an alleged incident in Homs in December. Foreign Policy Magazine website puts on a State Department cable saying that the activists say, hold on to your wallet, that chemical weapons were used against the wonderful rebels, death squads in the area of Homs, and that people got sick. Now, the consensus from talking heads is that this is basically tear gas. This is mace. These are kinds of chemical weapons. Well, if you're going to bomb Syria over this one, you better get ready to bomb the New York City Police Department. Everybody in the world saw the cop in New York squirting mace on this woman sitting down on the pavement of Occupy. And, you better get the Oakland police, too, because they did the same thing, right? There was tear gas all over the place in Oakland, and I'm sure many more places. So it's about at that level. Now, watch out for adventurers to come forward, right? We've got to remind ourselves of Source Curveball. Remember him? Completely invented. The guy should be serving life term in Leavenworth. I doubt that he is. How about Ahmed Chalabi, the great friend of the neocons, who told them what they wanted to hear about Syria? Bad news. Don't believe the chemical weapons story. Right now, Assad has no reason. Again, politically and I think militarily, too, Assad is winning. Remember, when we had that exchange of bases, right, we had the base in northern Syria, which the rebels claimed to have taken over, and which they may well have taken over, right? This is the Taftanaz military airport. The Taftanaz military airport seized by the death squads in northern Syria. All right, maybe they did, but at the same time, the Syrian army completed a 3-month campaign to retake the suburb of Daraya, Daraya, the suburb of Daraya near Damascus. And the key part about that Daraya is the border of a much larger and important military base south of Damascus. And we're told that many terrorists, in this case, were killed by the Syrian army, that a concentration of al-Nusra fighters was wiped out. You can see I did a commentary for Press TV about this. Notice also that the Syrian government more aggressive. They've now branded Brahimi, the son of Kofi Annan, as UN mediator. Syrian government now says Brahimi is flagrantly biased. And again, I would say flagrantly biased, just like Kofi Annan. Remember, take a look at Tarpley.net and Press TV website. You'll see an essay I wrote about how the destabilization of Syria is patterned on Hitler's destabilization of Czechoslovakia with the help of the British. In this case, it would have been Lord Runciman. Lord Runciman's mission is the model for Kofi Annan and Brahimi. Take a look at that. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Last segment here in our inaugural program. If you happen to be downtown on Monday, stop by Farragut West, the Feet of the Admiral, about 10:30 a.m., and we'll give you some stuff to do. But otherwise, keep in touch with United Front Against Austerity website. If you need guidance, if all else fails, send a email to me through the contact feature and the Speakers Bureau part of the Tarpley.net website, and we'll try to let you know what's happening. Right? We're sort of improvising this at the last moment with not that many people, but it may get to be quite significant, and it may make an impact. Right, we're going to try to see if we can't get on TV some way or other. And what we want on TV is Wall Street sales tax, 14th Amendment, and seize the Fed for 30 million jobs. That's what you want to put out, not any other stuff. Now, just concerning Algeria, Syria, again, the big news on Syria about a week ago was a meeting with Russia and the U.S. and Brahimi. And Russia, to the great relief of all of us, is hanging tough. Russia is hanging tough. Moscow says the departure of Assad cannot be a precondition. This is the meeting of Brahimi, Bogdanov for the Russian side, and Burns for the State Department. And that's good. That's the essential precondition for everything else. So thank you to Russia for that one. And that combination, the Russians hanging tough and the fall of the Daraya neighborhood after a campaign that started in November with many terrorists killed, this then led the Thani royals, right, the degenerate Prime Minister, Foreign Minister Thani of Qatar, right, member of the royal family, speaking for the emir. He said it's time to get back to the idea of a Arab force that would unilaterally attack Syria if Brahimi declares that he is stymied. So that would be Qatar, Saudi Arabia. Who else would it be? Any Arabs involved? Might be Turkey. That's hardly an Arab force. So they're in not ideal shape. So that, I think, is that. Now, two domestic themes. Again, what does it make sense to intervene on? And it came up this week. Is the demand to impeach Obama a relevant demand at this point? And in theory, of course, right, in an absolute vacuum, well, yeah, sure. Obama has, and I've even written an article about this. I read a whole article on Obamagate. What could the substance of Obamagate be if he is politically weakened to a significant degree? The obvious accusation is what we see every day now. You turned Libya over to al-Qaeda. You have used al-Qaeda in Syria. You have been working cheek by jowl with al-Qaeda. That's what's happening in Mali. That's what's happening now in Algeria. You have essentially gone into an alliance with al-Qaeda in certain parts of the world, but again, not maybe in others. The al-Qaeda in Pakistan, I think, is pretty much a U.S. ally, but the ones in Afghanistan may not be. So it's a somewhat confusing picture. But that's the obvious one. Then, of course, we have the drones. We have the assassinations of U.S. citizens. Al-Awlaki, the CIA lackey, of course, was a double agent, but that doesn't mean that he's a fire-free zone. You can't just go out and eliminate him like that. And the unlimited detention and so forth. So I write all this stuff up. But when you say impeachment, here's where you go. Steve Stockman, Tea Party lunatic from Texas, wants Obama impeached. And like most Republicans, it's for gun control. It's for unspecified things that Obama allegedly has done, wants to do to remove guns. You talk about impeachment, most people think you're going to want to impeach Obama on gun control and or using the 14th Amendment, which is exactly what we want him to do. So this puts you into bad company. It also puts you into the lap of LaRouche, who is also pushing this impeach Obama at all costs. And he did that all during the election. And remember, when you say impeach Obama, there's also this coup faction. They're not gone. Petraeus may be, knocked out for the moment. DeMint may be out of the Senate. A bunch of other generals and admirals may have been either fired or blighted in their careers, but they're still there. Don't make any mistake about that. The head of Lockheed may be out, but others are still around. So there still is a coup faction. We have, for example, the Republicans are now studying ways they can reorganize the Electoral College based on those gerrymandered districts. They're looking for states where the governor and the legislature are reactionary Republicans, but the states went for Obama. They're trying to drop the principle of winner take all state by state and go into a congressional district model. They think the reactionary Republicans could get some rural electoral votes out of that. You don't want to be a part of this. Rather, if it's a programmatic intervention, go with program. And again, avoid the personalization. You want to use a programmatic intervention and don't focus it all on people. The people who thought that once Bush was gone, everything would be hunky-dory, find out it's not true. You needed an economic and a political reform program. Now, the other side of this is the gun fetishists against the gunophobes. It's a wedge issue, as I have stressed. The gun fetishists and the gunophobes are going to fight it out. The forces arrayed on the field here are large, well-financed. The battle lines are drawn. They're hardened. The trench warfare has set in. There's virtually nothing that a small force could do to influence this. So I would say don't be drawn into it. Focus on the areas where a programmatic intervention on these ideas, Wall Street sales tax, 14th Amendment, seize the Fed, 30 million jobs for infrastructure, and related reforms. Right? We can tell you how to prevent Wall Street from driving up the price of gasoline, how to re-regulate markets, what to do about derivatives, ban CDOs and CDS, things like this. But on the gunophobe side, we're constantly told the guns are a barrier to tyranny. Well, they can just as easily help tyranny. And the gun fetishists have to answer this once again. The principal gun fetishists have spent the last 2 years supporting Ron Paul. Ron Paul is a union buster. He wants to destroy the only mass organizations that could be a barrier to a totalitarian coup. And they were. The entire Occupy Wall Street was really based on some unions showing up on a couple of occasions. Let's also remember, anybody supporting Ron Paul, the gun fetishists supporting Ron Paul, were supporting somebody who wanted to cut 62% out of the food stamp budget. So 50 million Americans would go from $1.50 per person per meal to 50 cents per person per meal, right? Pellagra, rickets, scurvy, and death, mortality, morbidity on a mass scale. Where is the indication that the gun fetishists are going to fight for something worthwhile? Isn't it just more likely that they'll go in the opposite direction, and that can get very, very ugly very, very fast? The other thing, of course, is you're going to assert your fight against tyranny with semi-automatic guns. Well, the other side would have tanks, airplanes, neutron bombs, poison gas. This is a bad joke. If you really wanted to make this argument, you'd say, well, we should have tanks, we should have an air force, we should have our own militias. And then where are you? You're in Lebanon. You've got Middle East militias. You're basically on your way to Libya right there. And I suppose that is the goal, whether these people know it or not. We have some interesting research about the National Rifle Association. Gosh, founded by Ambrose Burnside. I didn't know that. The loser of Fredericksburg. So you can see originally it was sort of a paramilitary group supporting the Union Army. Okay. Then along comes Clifford Neal Knox, Oklahoma, Texas, Abilene Christian College, has a coup d'etat inside the National Rifle Association, 1977. This is somebody who thinks that the assassination of Kennedy, and King is a plot to take away guns. Can you believe it? He writes in Shotgun News, 1994, is it possible to think that some of those incidents could have been created for the purpose of disarming the people of the free world? Are we nuts? This is the idea that if your obsession is guns, then any event will be interpreted in these terms. What I will just develop in coming weeks is the relevance of a nonviolent strategy, a Martin Luther King-style nonviolent strategy. We just had King Day. We need to honor King. Let's honor King through his ideas. When you have an opposition of the type that we have and a regime of the type we have, the nonviolent method is the way to go. That's what overthrew British colonialism in India. That's what got some civil rights for black Americans. Let's go with